So, has anyone in here used the lathe before? What'd you make?
I made chess pieces.
Nice. All right, so we are going to be using the lathe in particular to make bowls like this. Okay, so that you guys can take your nice spoons that you made or forks, and then you can eat stuff out of your bowls. Okay. Now, this bowl, I wouldn't be able to put liquids and things in because you can see there's a nice little crack in here. Just because from the log this came from, it had some defects in it, so sometimes that happens. But you guys will most likely be making yours out of solid chunks of wood like this, out of oak. This isn't a finished bowl, so it's still a little rough looking, but that's what we'll be doing. So, but first, there's other ways you can use the lathe. Okay guys, I can use the lathe to make things like this. So this is a spindle or a handle or anything round like a baseball bat, stuff like that. Because I'm gonna take something square and I'm gonna make it round, okay? So first I'm gonna show you this, okay? So with this, if you wanna make like a handle or a spindle, you wanna take a piece of wood and you wanna try to cut it as square as you can get it. Okay, so does this look like a square? Pretty close, okay? So what you need to do first is you need to, kind of like on your guys' stools, we need to draw a line from corner to corner, because what is that gonna give me? The exact center, okay? Because when I put things on the lathe, they spin at high speeds, and if you put something on the lathe, especially if it's bigger and it's not centered, it could wobble out of control, possibly to the point where it falls off. And if something's spinning at high speeds like a bowl, and if this thing flies off, it could come back and hit you in the face, okay? So, once you got your piece like this, now, for your pieces like a bowl, what I would do is I would cut a rectangular block, and what I would do is I would still draw a line from corner to corner, but what I would do is I would use one of these, okay, so this is called faceplate, okay? If you look at the bottom of this bowl, you can see it has holes in it. Now, if you don't want holes in your bowl, we can do different things and put like scrap pieces on there, which we can get rid of later. But this one I just didn't have a base plate or a backing board on it. But when I take this base plate, I can attach it on and screw it on, which I can then thread onto the lathe and make a nice round bowl shape from it. Okay? But for this, I'm gonna take this, and what I'm gonna do is with a back saw, I am gonna cut a little groove that goes about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 inch down my block. Okay, make sure you stay on those lines. Maybe a little bit more. Just like that. Do that on both sides. And then on the other side, I can just take a scribe and I'm gonna poke a hole. Okay? So once I have that, then we can get ready to go to the lathe. So let's come over to this side. So we're gonna use this lathe right here. So we have 4 lathes, okay? This is a newer one we got last year. I like this one just because it has a nice little knob that has a variable speed adjustment. The other ones, if I want to adjust the speed, I have to go in and actually change the pulleys on them, okay? But we have 4 options. We got this one. This is my own personal lathe, and with it, the tailstock wasn't working properly, but we can still use this end for making bowls and stuff. And then we got the bigger ones, which we can do bigger things like giant baseball bats or bigger bowls, just because it's nice and bigger. Or legs for tables and things like that, okay? Or I can make a hammer like this. You know what kind of hammer this is? Who would use a hammer like this? A judge. A judge's mill, it's called a gavel, okay? So sometimes I take this in class, and if I need to get kids' attention, I'll go like this. Make some noise, okay? But once you got this, what you're gonna do is now with our lathe, we have 2 different ends. I have the headstock here, which is gonna hold this piece here. This is called the spur bit. This piece here is called the tailstock, and it holds this end here, which spins on a bearing, and it's the live center. Okay, so with this, what I want to do is I want to take this, line the spur bit one with the side I cut my grooves on. Okay, so I'm going to line it up, and then I'm going to take a wooden mallet, and I'm going to hammer it in till it grabs. Okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push it in and it holds with friction. Then I can loosen my tailstock, slide it over, and then we can tighten it down, and then we can tighten this up so that's on nice and snug. Okay. Now, with the lathe, anybody know what kind of safety gear I need? I need a face shield. Yes, I do. Okay. So usually there's face shields around this table, or they're hanging up over there. Okay. A little dirty. So you need a face shield. What else do you need? You don't need hearing protection. It's not that loud. Okay.
Hair up.
Hair definitely needs to be up because you're going to be hanging over a machine with rotating parts. So you need to make sure your hair is tied up. Long sleeves for sure need to be rolled up, and anything like dangly stuff like necklaces, drawstrings, all that needs to be tucked in, because unless you got huge hoops that are like this big, you're fine. Okay. But like I said before with like the drill press demo, if your head's that close, then you have a different problem. Okay. You shouldn't have your head that close. All right. Now, with these two in particular, if I remember correctly, these two actually don't need the main power turned on anymore. Okay. I just need to plug them in. That one plugged in. Okay. So then, with this one, it has on-off switch here. So, like I said, what I like about this one is I can easily adjust the speed on this from slow to fast. But with the lathe, it's a little bit different than other tools. I need to check out your setup every single time before you use it, because if it's not centered, it could come flying off. Okay. But when I'm here and when you're doing this, the first thing we want to check is, like after we got our gear good to go, make sure you ask me before you use it, is I want to just turn it on quickly, and I want to see how it spins. Okay. Is it vibrating funny at all? No. Okay. So, do you guys remember that slightly bigger bowl I made? So that one was made from a log and it was slightly uneven shape. When I put this on the lathes, since it wasn't even, it was actually shaking this whole table. Like everything was vibrating. So I just shave it down a bit to get it even so it's good to go. And if you do have big square shapes, so for example with your bowls you're going to make, after you draw your corners from center to center, you're going to draw a circle on your board, and then on the band side you're going to cut off as much excess and try to make a nice circle shape so that when you put it on, it doesn't have as much to take off later. Okay? So, some other things. When using the lathe, we have different things like these. These are called tool rests. Okay? So, depending on how long your project is, will affect on what size and when you use. So, since the piece I'm using isn't that big, I'm going to use this little one. Okay? And sometimes if we're using things like bowls, and like on that one there, we can have like L-shaped ones, so where I can hit like the side of my bowl and also get from the front. So the tool rest goes in here, so I want to loosen this up, slide it in, and then I want it to be just a little bit below the center of my piece. Okay, so a little bit under. And then if I loosen this, I can bring it closer. Sometimes you have to wiggle it a bit. Okay, so just make it a bit higher. So about there. Okay, make sure it's nice and tight. And then what you want to do is you want to bring it close to your project so that there's like an 1/8 to a 1/4 inch gap between your project and the tool rest. Okay, so can everyone see that gap right there?
Yeah.
What you also need to do is before you turn it on, so we're going to tighten this, you need to spin this and make sure it doesn't hit anywhere, okay? Because if your piece of wood is an uneven shape, it's like, okay, it's fine here, but let's say this corner sticks out a bit, if you turn it on, it could catch this and fly off. So we need to make sure it spins freely without touching before we start, okay? And let's just shift it over a little bit, double check it. All right. Now, we found out earlier, everybody in here is right-handed, correct? Okay. So then to shape this, we have chisels of all different shapes and sizes, okay? So you're typically going to start with a chisel that looks like this or looks like this to start, okay? So this U-shaped chisel here is called a bowl gouge, or depending on its shape, a roughing gouge, okay? So this is probably the one you're going to start with, okay? Just to kind of get the bulk of the work done. And with all of the chisels, something you need to check and make sure you're doing as you go along is you need to make sure these are sharp, okay? So dull tools aren't going to cut nicely on your piece of wood, or it's going to potentially tear out and not leave as nice as a finish. If you have a sharp chisel, it's going to be much better later down the road, okay? And depending on what kind of wood you use, softer woods like pine can still work really nicely on the lathe, but not as well. Certain hardwoods like maple and walnut are really nice to turn on the lathe. So like last semester with my woodworking class, we did Christmas ornaments, and we had students making all sorts of ornaments on the lathe, and we made like snowmen and stuff. It was pretty cool. So make sure they're sharp, okay? So then we can have chisels like this. This is a scraper, okay? Has a nice little oval shape to it. Then what else we got? We got chisels like this that kind of slope on an angle and also kind of come to a point here. This is called a skew chisel, okay? And then we have this guy here. This is called a parting tool. So say if I was to make a handle for this, typically what you're going to want to do is with your piece of wood, you're going to want to leave a little bit of scrap on the end. And then typically with this tool, you can go in, and then afterwards we can cut off the ugly parts, and then you have the nice handle piece on the inside, okay? And then sometimes you can get tools like these. So this is similar to the scraper, but it's made out of a carbide bit instead of just a piece of steel. So these stay sharper longer, and you can also unscrew them and rotate them to get the other side of the bit. But I can't really sharpen these, so whenever these things are worn out, then we can just buy new ones. Whereas these ones I can take to a grinder and I can sharpen them up, okay? So with this tool, if you're right-handed, your right hand is going to hold the front end of the chisel that's closer to the end, okay? Your left hand is going to hold the handle, okay? And on the lathe, there's a groove. Typically there's a groove on most of these tool rests, not all of them have it, but most of them should. I'm going to ride my finger in here. I'm going to put this on the tool rest, and while this is spinning, I'm going to gently push it in.
Most of us can't see what you're doing right now.
Then you should sit to the side. Because I can't really go like this, because that's not how you're supposed to do it.
Okay, you.
Okay. So if you can't see, please stand over.
I just want to have everything take out.
So I'm going to bring this in. I'm going to gently push into my project. And I find it's nice if I hold this to my side, that gives me extra support. And I'm going to go back and forth like this. Now, if you find it's only comfortable to go one direction, that's okay. But when you get more comfortable, you'll be able to go back and forth like this. Okay? Now, your hand should always be supporting it on the tool rest. I've seen some students in the past try to hold it like this. Try to do it, that's not safe, because you don't have as much control of it, and it's going to chatter around a bit. So you need to make sure you're holding the tool rest and going back and forth. Okay. Now, do you guys remember how big this gap should be? How big? So about 1/8 to 1/4 inch. Okay. The biggest it should ever get is about 1 inch. Anything bigger than that, it's too big. Okay. So, for example, if I loosen this, and let's say that, does that look like it's bigger than it? Yeah, so if this happens, what could happen is my chisel could potentially go in there and it could potentially catch and flip like this. So as you're taking more material off of this, what's going to happen to this gap as I start chiseling? It's going to get bigger, okay? So as I start taking more material off, you need to be mindful of that, because as I take more material off and it starts to get as a bigger gap, you're just going to want to periodically just wiggle this forward, make sure it's good to go, turn it on, and then we can go. Okay? So, kind of like the drill press, if I have a big drill bit, do I go fast or slow? Slow. Same thing on the lathe. If I'm doing a bigger bowl, I want to crank it down to a slow speed, and then once I've got everything rounded, centered, and good to go, then I can crank it up, and then we can do final touches, and then we can sand it. Now, for those of you who don't like sanding, the lathe is awesome for sanding because you can make something super smooth very quickly. Yeah, when it's spinning at like super speeds, you put the sandpaper on and it like, I'll show you.
Yeah.
Okay. So, it's super cool. Super cool. Especially for those who don't like sandpaper.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so once everything is good to go, and you're okay with me, then we can start. Okay? So typically, the first objective is we want to make this a round cylinder, or a round shape for a bowl. Once we got it to a nice round shape and all the square corners are gone, then we can start using other chisels and we can give it profiles and curves. So I want to make a mini handle. Okay, so for example, say if I was to make like a handle like this. Okay, I'm going to make like a mini version of this.
I wish that you were making a tentacle. Yeah.
Well, I would have to use a different piece and a different setup. Okay.
It looks like this isn't glued together.
Okay.
Shouldn't you be showing us that for a bowl right
No,
now?
I will individually, but the setup is pretty much the same other than for a bowl. So for a bowl, like I said, you're going to attach to the faceplate first. And then the faceplate gets screwed onto these big threads and then you shape it the same way I'm doing it. Except the only difference is instead of doing this way, like I'm going to do this way, but then I'm also going to have to hold it like this and get it from the front. But I will show you guys individually when I give you the demo when you guys are getting ready to do your bowls. So I'll work with you guys one at a time. But I'm going to try and make a mini version of this. Okay? So once we got this good to go, make sure your face shield's down. Okay? Now, this is a very messy tool. Okay? It's going to send shavings all over the place. So if you want a shop coat or something, I can lend you one. So if you need it, let me know. Because as you see, I might get a lot of shavings on my apron here. And then we can turn it on. Now, since this is smaller, I'm going to crank this up a little bit. Okay, and then we can. Now, you can see I'm already starting to shave the corners up. It's pretty rough right now. It's cool. It is very cool. This gap still isn't over an inch yet, but if it was to start getting bigger, remember, I would move it closer. So I'm going to continue this until we get a nice cylinder. And when you're doing this, just make sure you don't push in too hard, because if you push in too hard, you're going to know, especially if it still has square edges on it, because it's going to grab and it could potentially tear and chunk out your piece of wood. Now, pine is relatively soft, so that's why it looks kind of frayed and rough. But if you have hardwoods, like I said, like maple, I can do this with maple, and I almost don't even need the sand sometimes. It like leaves a nice finish if you know what you're doing. Now, when you're doing this, make sure you don't get the chisel too close to the live center and the spur center, especially the spur center, because it has kind of those weird edges on it. If it catches the chisel, it could grab your chisel, or it could put a big dent in this and then have to spend some time sharpening. Okay, so we'll do a little bit more shaping. Now that I've got this kind of roughed out, I'm just going to clean it up a little bit with the scraper. Now, kind of like the router, remember how I said if you go too fast, it's going to tear? So, similar to this, if I try to cut too fast, it's going to tear. See how I went slower and now it's not as rough as it was before? Now, remember how you guys really like seeing me on the disc sander use the eraser?
Yeah.
So satisfying. Another thing I find students find satisfying is when I mark this up to get profile. So what you're going to do is you're going to take a pencil, and let's say I want my handle to be this big. So remember, we want to give a little bit of space between the two ends, because I'm going to cut that up. Okay? So what you're going to do is I'm going to line this up here, turn this on, everyone watching? And you can draw nice lines all the way around really quickly.
That's so perfect. It's so perfect.
So perfect, I know, exactly. Okay, now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take the parting tool Now I'm going to put a little groove in here. Because the piece in between that is the piece I'm going to keep. Okay? Everything on the outside, we're not going to keep. Okay? So once we got this, then we can pick some other chisels, like skew chisels, or like this one, and I can start shaping it. So I want to make a handle that looks like this. Okay? So we're going to round the edges. Actually, I'm going to switch to, let's say, this one. I'll show you how to do the lines as well. Okay, so we're going to make something like this. So if I want to actually line this up, like say it's going to curve down here, curve down there. So I can draw my lines again on here, like this. Like that. So I'm going to have a little bit of a dip in there. I'm going to round the edge and round the edge. Okay, so it's going to look like this. So first we're going to create a little dip in there. I can do the same on the outside edge. Now, sometimes if I can't get in there, I'm going to switch for one maybe like this. And you can get in there. Do the same there. So now is it starting to look like that handle? Then I can take the skew chisel and I can create those nice little grooves that you saw. So I can take this, and I can hold this here, and I can evenly space this out. Like that. Now, let's say that's what I want it to look like, and I'm done. Okay. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take this, move it out of the way, and now we can sand it. Exactly. Okay. So you want to get some sandpaper. So you want to start with a rougher grit sandpaper. And the way this spins, it's going in this direction. So what you want to do is you want to pull the sandpaper from the bottom. Okay. Because if I hold it on the top, it could potentially go like this on. So make sure you're holding it on the bottom. And depending on how big your sandpaper is, you can even like hold it like this, and like go back and forth like that. And it's going to make a super nice smooth surface. And you want to transition from rough to smoother grits. But if I have grooves like this, you don't want to hold it on too long or it's going to get rid of the grooves. And you're going to have to put them back in again. But see how rough it is? Anyone want to feel it? See how rough it is? Yeah, I'm going to do this for like a few seconds and we're going to see how smooth this is.
Oh, damn.
Oh, damn.
It's been through some rough times.
Oh, it's some rough time. Alright, so we're going to sand this quickly. Now, two things rubbing together create what?
Friction.
Friction. It's going to get hot, so make sure you're careful of that. Okay? You want to get in all the spots. Alright, how long was I sanding?
Like 40 seconds. Is it gonna be hot? Oh, whoa!
Ooh,
What
whoa,
the heck?
look at that.
Whoa.
So that's with, I think, this is maybe 150.
This is smoother than my
This is smooth.
Okay.
Alright, now, I'm going to just transition quickly to, and this is underneath.
It spins around.
Alright.
Yeah, bro, I got some
Alright,
good
so
ones.
It only works
I'm going to crank this up a little bit, and we're going to use 180 grit.
Looks like
liquid nitrogen.
Now, it does get quite hot depending on how you're holding it. Like, you can just feel the sandpaper. It gets warm.
Oh, damn.
Okay,
Yeah.
so-
yeah, it does.
Now, feel that.
Whoa.
Oh, and I
Why
believe
have we
it's,
not told us about this before?
well,
Yeah.
because you can't sand everything on the way.
Why not?
Like, I can't sand smooth.
Well, you probably could find a way.
But-
If there's a will, there's a
Now,
way.
once
you made a
get
round
this
stool.
sanded to your liking,
Exactly.
then you can take it off. Now, remember on the bandsaw we had the dowel jig?
Yeah.
So then on the dowel jig, I could cut the ends off, and then I would have a handle,
Wow.
which I could use on these chisels.
Then you can use the disc sander.
And then you could sand it by hand in some other spots. We'd probably use the belt sander, not the disc sander.
Yeah, 'cause
Um,
they might save.
and yeah, any questions about the lathe? No? Alright, I think we're good.
When can I use